So now, before having the lunch break, you have time to ask all the questions that are running in your minds at the moment. So raise your hand, and there's a mic, so try to use the mic so that you can capture also the question to the camera feed.
Hello, my name is Anne Konttori. I work for the city of Oulu. Thank you. Very interesting and inspiring presentations. I was just wondering, most of you somehow referred to this local ecosystem and Oulu as your home base for it. I was wondering if you could make a short comment about it. You all seem to value a possibility of having even stronger ecosystem, but where we are now, what is the state of art, and what would you see as the next step to get ahead and take our place in this world as an ecosystem?
I've only been here a couple of months, so it's hard for me to assess the full state of things. But I think one thing I find exciting about it is the community here is not so large that it becomes completely disconnected and everyone's kind of lost sort of doing their own things across a very huge area. And it's also not so small that there's too little going on. I think it's a very nice size for people in very different areas, whether it's art, engineering, business, city planning, all kinds of things. The city can come together and everyone else, and I find this a great opportunity. But I have a hard time assessing what's already here now and how things work. I'm still learning that, so I'll leave it to maybe other people who have been in the city longer to comment on that.
I guess we'll move this way. My initial thought of that is with regards to time and the amount of time that we as various types of professionals have to do collaboration. And my argument would be that if within our own institutions, or for example in the funding mechanisms that provide resources for us as professionals, can actually afford us time to do this collaboration more. Because, for example, for myself as a professional who works at a university, there's certain kinds of expectations about the kind of work I have as a university employee, whereas I would imagine, somebody mentioned Kone Foundation, or somebody who's an artist who gets funding, I would imagine the expectations for what that artist is supposed to do are kind of the scope of how the funding works. And so what I would argue is, potentially as organizations that support professionals, to allow us to have actually more physical time to do things together. That would be my initial reaction.
I might comment on that bit. So maybe there's these two aspects. If we have short distances, we have easier to build up connections and networking in this size of town as Oulu. That helps us to actually do collaboration, but it also enables us to build up funding plans and programs, because Finland has quite strong funding bodies like Finnish Cultural Foundation, Kone Foundation, and governmental bodies, and they are encouraging this kind of a collaboration between art and science and technology nowadays, and more broader sense that are aimed to be societal projects. So there's possibilities, and these kind of events like these are really fruitful on seeing people, getting to know what is happening on business side, on research side, on artistical side. So I think that we have a lot of possibilities ahead.
Yeah, so my background is, I started from the university and then went to the company side. So basically I think one of the biggest challenges is that you can create frameworks and programs and try to come up with ideas to propose as a projects. Those are kind of artificial ways of these days to kind of get the ideas flowing. So I think some kind of serendipity is probably needed to kind of foster this kind of coalition of arts and technology and the public versus private. So, but how to make that happen? I'm not sure if there is any kind of success formulas for how this kind of public-private sector or these different fields have been kind of collided together in a successful fashion. I don't know if in the US there are some interesting examples in that regards, but I think the danger always is to have formalisms that kind of give you guidelines how to apply, how to construct your consortium and so on, and that kind of limits the kind of ways of working together. So that could be enforced more.
I think Oulu already is pretty lively with arts, and it's possible to work in Oulu as an artist. And at the moment, artists already, they do their best with the resources they have. And it's not possible for them, artists, to take the next big leap forward with these resources. So I think that, especially for Oulu 2026, the next big step has to come from the organization, like from Oulu, to give more resources and to help artists to do collaboration with and to help them forward, because I think already we do what we can.
Yeah, so I moved here roughly 3 years ago and a bit, and my impression, particularly from the dance, kind of nationally, is that it has been a bit separate, and there is a need for this kind of process-led experimentations, which really brings interdisciplinary people together. And it's that kind of practical, having time to do stuff together practically, that you really start breaking the way we are talking about things and just coming to kind of being able to understand each other and start growing things from there. So definitely more support for that kind of process-led events.
Yeah, just a question actually to Steve and all the panelists regarding the concept of commodity. Like the smartphones are becoming the commodity. They are now very powerful in actually, they're the PCs of the modern age in a way. People are using them, the kids are using them, but the commodity that we are not really having on the mobile phones is the art, because there's not really a funding yet. But there's a lot of funding for new technology and new products, and companies are actually, like you said, Steve, that they're actually using a lot of money, but kind of tossing the coin whether it's going to be successful. I'm kind of pondering on the question whether we could use with the artist kind of the creative side, but like they're really good in making the user interfaces. The engineers are not very good at that, but how do we use the interface with these commodities, with these smartphones to more interact with the content? Because I think like the things that Apple is doing at the moment, they're making these contact lenses that could actually bring in what you are now doing with the HoloLens. Could that actually work, that the artists come with some content and then we come with the technological, kind of the interface?
Yeah, I think that's right. From what I've seen, it tends to move in one direction. There's a place where the money's at, which is the big business, and then largely in engineering companies, and then the engineering companies have a chance to invest in a content ecosystem, and they tend to pick maybe what looks comfortable from a short range perspective, right? So in the case of Oculus, Facebook, they've invested, I would say at least $500 million, maybe more. I don't really know, in trying to stimulate content development. But I think largely that was devoted to recycling old business models. So assuming that game studios that have existed for a very long time on a PC platform, on regular screens, will be able to just transition quickly what they're doing and make some kind of content that's more than a demo, something that's really sustainable for the ecosystem and in this growing ecosystem. And it largely hasn't worked out so well. So I think that there tends to be for the people with the resources, there tends to be a focus on short-term gain and comfort in sort of recycling what's already there. And I assume that artists would be more excited to come completely from the other direction and do something completely new. So I do find it interesting in Finland, at least, given that there's more funding for the arts in general, there's higher taxes, there's ways to kind of redistribute these sort of resources in a way that might be good for the long-term investment. I think is very encouraging. I try to imagine an artist making films in the year 1900, trying to say, one day there's going to be a big business making films, making movies. Just trust me, it's going to be a big business. Who's going to invest in that in 1900, right? It took until maybe 1930 before that's a big business. And now you look at how movie making is today, and it's an incredible business. So the artist shouldn't have to make the business argument. They should be allowed to play and try new things, and hopefully the technology can respond to that. What mechanisms can be done for that? I don't know. It's up for maybe the city and the country to figure out.
Can I just add from the kind of artistic point of view as well? When creating dance work, that there is technology part of it, it's incredibly important that the technology and the dance are happening at the same time, at the same space, and that's exactly what Steve was saying in terms of needing to have that time and space that both can develop from that concept together, rather than that I go and create stuff in the studio and then try to fit some technology to it. It doesn't work like that. And the best marriage is that when they happen together at the same time.
Maybe there's two aspects of arts. I mean, there's this applied part that you can actually like use art as a tool in one sense, and then there's this part that art is ahead of its time. So these technologies that are emerging, artists are adopting them quite fastly. And of course, they need support for it. But there's no straight economical benefit maybe there. There's maybe cultural or societal benefits. There's these two different aspects at least. And then there's the structures of economical side of contemporary art that is used for selling and reselling. That's another realm also. So there's quite big range of arts, and art has been with us since our Paleolithic times. I mean, it's one of our survival techniques maybe, I don't know. It's not just decorative element, so we have quite deep relation with the creative part ourselves in that sense.
Hello, I'm Sakina Oulu and I work at VTT. And we have done some research in the Netherlands about how the creative industry has been in contact with technology and what were the results. And I would like to ask especially a little bit more from our creative panelists that if you had some collaboration with technology, either firms or people in the research, did you find any added value for your work, for your world from this collaboration? And if you think that there is a way that you can actually get this in a more permanent way, I mean, how this collaboration is working for you, apart from the fact that you might find some source of money, because people will pay to have something technological that has also something artistic. I would like to hear your added value from that.
So for me, I'm interested in working with technology because it gives me as a choreographer something completely new. If I'm working on stage, for example, and if I wasn't using technology, it's a very different thing than if there is a piece of kit of something, whatever that is. And for each of the piece of technology I'm using, I have to rethink the choreographic skills. So it's really kind of developing me as a professional, having to think very laterally what I'm going to do with it, because the normal rules just don't apply. So that's one thing. And in terms of, you talked about collaboration with others, I think generally I'm a collaborator. I don't like working just on my own necessarily. And also that kind of, the added value is about seeing things very differently. The other person always have a different view on or how they look at the situation. It's always a bit different than what I've seen. It's like, oh, it's really opening my eyes as well.
Well, I've worked more traditionally with like doing the research myself about technology. I haven't worked in collaboration with some other like technological, but maybe you have.
Yes, I have quite long history on that area, and I think that the collaborations benefits and there's big challenges also. It's not so easy. You can actually show it easy as an easy process, but there's a lot of failure stories and communications gone wrong and things like that. But in general, I think the thing is that in personal level, I see that I like to challenge my view, expand the horizon that I know, both on knowledge side and emotional side. When you are working with research units or researchers and companies, you actually expand that kind of horizon. And then when you are processing it to the art pieces or processes or artistical acts or art and technology acts or whatever, it expands the horizon of audience and your collaborative partners. Usually it has to be built up based on mutual benefits, so it has to be fruitful for all of the collaborative partners. And I have quite long-lasting collaborations with different groups and different companies, and it has been challenging but really interesting. It also binds art to more tightly to the society when you do it. So I see benefits on that. And it's a bit about future. The horizon is the future where we are heading. Artistical thinking is more broader than many other ways of thinking. We have design processes that are aimed to certain points or economical processes, but art can be quite broad in the beginning.
And just a quick piece to add, because I would say I'm more on the side as an educator, but somebody had already said earlier today this idea of mashing people together that don't normally come together, and the kind of creativity that can come with that, whether it's somebody who runs a business, a technology business, whether it's a musician. And just as an example, in our lab currently, we have a team that's developing an interactive children's book using voice recognition. So these young aspiring professionals are gaining a huge amount by being able to have access to people that they normally wouldn't in, let's say, an educational setting, because they're potentially much more integrated in an ecosystem setting with the professionals who really know the stuff, or with the people who are actually developing the technologies themselves, and the things that they learn as young professionals that they can then take on into their future careers.
Yeah, hi, my name is Aadu Luminen and I'm a student. My question goes to Steve about the idea about perception engineering. That was really fascinating. Did you come up with the idea yourself? And like, is it already a thing, or what does it take to get to hire a perception engineer?
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm glad to hear that a student is intrigued by it. It's not already a thing, and I got the term, as I mentioned maybe very quickly during my talk. I was visiting Huawei in China, and one of the engineers was saying he had 100 engineers working on a VR project, secret project, some project, and but he said I don't have a single perception engineer, and that really struck me. He had already been reading my book, and I'd already been working on merging human perception with the engineering side of it. So it was already my thinking that he was responding to. But I didn't. That phrase "perception engineer" really struck me. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's perfect. Why didn't I see it? I'm the engineer. So it's exactly bringing these perceptual concepts together. I think one of the things in the university we could strive to do is to try to work towards building up through courses and projects and things some kind of master's degree in perception engineering, for example. That would be a mixture of understanding the basics of human perception, some physiology, neuroscience, together with things like computer graphics, computer vision, some sensing technology, computation. You can mix all these things together, and then also perhaps have some big projects that people have to do to complete something like that. So that would be one kind of step that we try to push in the direction of, let's say, generating some educated perception engineers to go out into the workforce and understand this kind of very delicate interplay between the human body and the systems that we're engineering to interface with at a very tight level.
Yeah, so I think I see that the perception engineer is actually part of this big cyber physical systems trend at the moment. So basically, we already are cyber physical systems with our mobile phones at the moment. There will be more ways of us being digital all the time, and that being seamlessly integrated to our experience and expanding our kind of experience horizon throughout that, and definitely that, perception engineer, AI engineering, cognitive science, and whatever you can kind of capture to kind of kind of lower the gap between the technological information systems and human cognitive kind of interactive systems is clearly the trend that is going to be very strong in the next 5 years, I think.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. One thing I noticed that happened, I went early in Oculus, I pushed and was able to hire some perceptual psychologists, and we had a small team doing perceptual evaluation kinds of things. And the first reaction of engineering people is, what do we do with these people? They don't write code all day, you know, right? Like, it's really even hard for them to understand the value, because everyone's compared based on how much software, how high quality their software is that they're writing for the software engineering companies, for other kinds of engineering. So even understanding what their value is and how they can be integrated into teams is a big challenge. But I think some kind of hitting perception engineering directly as some unified topic can really, I think, help those kind of people to survive in that environment and hopefully be recognized as talented and necessary in having the backgrounds required for this.
Engineers are listening. Yes.
Okay, hello, my name is Samu Forsblom. I'm a cultural director of Oulu. I have two questions. One is concerning the Oulu European Capital of Culture project. And I'm pretty sure that art and technology is one key driver in our application, and there we need your help to build it up. But how should we approach the dilemma, because we have to leave the application in 2020 and the actual year is 26, and as we know, the technology will change a lot and we don't know so much about the future. So what could be the right way to kind of describe this thing, not to mention any single technology? What are your thoughts about that? And another question is that, Steve, you were talking about this unholy marriage, and in the city of Oulu we have a priest for that. Olli, can you stand up once again? So he's a priest for this unholy marriage, and my question is that how you art and tech people would like to continue this work, that we could have this marriage going on after this seminar. Thank you.
Maybe someone else can go first. I'm afraid.
Well, about the first question, I think if we design concepts and we work on ideas, it doesn't have to be that specific about the technique. When it will be like, it's more interesting to work with ideas and concepts if you don't know, if you can't see 6 years from now.
I think it's also cultivating that the idea of interdisciplinary work and providing more platforms or improving the platforms that are already existing, creating better partnerships and cooperations, and actually knowing what each other are doing and how we can work together to strengthen that. I can't remember the other questions personally.
And anyways, it's a process. Like, you don't have to know what's happening 6 years forward. It's as long as you work in a creative process, the end results will be good.
I think one of the kind of big questions that could be had is that, like, what is our kind of relationship with the technology going to look like in the coming years, and is there a vision that the entire city culture is embracing that? What are the bits and pieces that are coming together and that are creating maybe a new digital, intertwined culture between the traditional culture creators and then the actual technologists in the city, and trying to make these bits and pieces together.
Maybe this it wrap up things that maybe it can be process that we suggest possible, not models, but collaborative environments, collaborative partners that are developing things, and the actual application can be like one step during the process. So it's like working method to go to the cultural capital year, but maybe beyond that also. So you just start the process of collaborations and you show where we are in the process during that time, and then show how it will continue during, whether we get at the cultural capital position or not, it will still go strong. So it's like development of whole region and our ways to more merge with the technological aspect also and see more critical and potential way.
And maybe just to add on that, and certainly from this term interdisciplinary, even from my presentation, I think you can imagine I'm an advocate of that. But it's this idea of long-term capacity. So it's not just a fact of Tanya and I to, in our own time, outside of our various professional work time, to try to think of a way to collaborate, but that we actually do have a long-term process that allows us to do that with some more time. And so, we hear that there's a lab through the university that Stephen works with. We have a lab, there's a lab next door, there's studios that I'm sure everyone here works with. So I think one of the challenges is if we don't have the time to be close enough to talk and to know what each other are doing, that potentially makes it difficult to future-proof ourselves. But if there is that longer-term vision that allows us to at least keep in dialogue and have the time to do that and explore together, again, I'm personally much more confident that 6 years down the road, if we've been able to have that dialogue together and have the spaces to do that, we'll be able to do that together.
I agree very much with the kind of things Blair was just saying. I think it's very difficult for us to find time, and that has a lot to do with what the people value in the particular institutions or organizations that we're in right now. So, at the university, I come here right away, and it's like, okay, you should be publishing this many papers, you need this kind of funding, you need this administrative, this, that, all these things kind of laid out. And it's really hard. What if I say, well, I'm going to take the next 6 months and just kind of goof around with some artists for a while. Is that going to be okay with you? Do you value that? So having people in charge who understand and value the kinds of activities, so that the faculty in the university or the artists in their side, there's constrained maybe by resources mainly and other kinds of issues, but I don't understand their world or pretend to. But there's different things that get you the opportunity to get out of the normal routine and know that you're doing something that's going to be appreciated, even when it's a very high risk. And say I goofed around with artists for 6 months and accomplished nothing, that's normally part of the usual metrics at the university, is that process still going to be valued so that a bunch of people do it, we know some succeed, some fail, and that's just fine. So the unholy marriage has to first come with unholy dating, I guess. Hopefully having a lot of social activities and ways for people to get together and do fun things and talk a lot and have mutual respect will lead somewhere in the long term. Anything that seeds that kind of activity will be very nice.
So Olli is our Tinder.
Play safe.
Yeah, I think, as a newly appointed priest for this task, I have to say that there is a common goal, which actually Steve started with. He started with the storytelling. And we really need to tell the story of Oulu. We have started, in a very short, kind of a miniature scale, telling the story about the rise and fall of Nokia. We have that in our museum. How many people here have seen it? Raise your hands. Not everyone. So this is a problem. We don't tell the same story, or we're not really involved in this. We have to get involved. We have to have every academic, every person in our companies, interested in this. The content has to be interesting enough, and we have to tell each other about things we are doing.
Okay, hello, I'm Pekka Asiuru, and for City of Oulu, I worked in 2007-8 in the Shanghai Expo project, and which was I was a designer there. I'm also a computer scientist, and we had some artwork there in the basics, and then the school system was the one key issue there in that project, and we won the competition of over 100 cities over the world, but there was no funding then after. That was the idea of this. What we achieved was then I think it was for the FinPro, and then was that the Finnish Expo in the Shanghai Expo in 2010. It was based on our work. But if you think about this situation now, is there any? I have not no information of what is the situation planning of this. If we have the deadline for 2020, so we should have all the together one planning project with artists, I would also give my word and my experience for that. Okay, that's my comment now. And look for that Shanghai project. What was the planning there, and what we can learn from that?
Hello, Tuukka Uskala. I've got a question for audience. Do you consider yourself more artist or engineer? Hands up. I'm an artist. Where are the engineers?
Yeah.
Oh, almost 50. That's cool.
Some must be neither, right?
There's no English.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And that's where you have to fit.
Hey, I have a comment about all this story of Oulu. When you want to work with artists and art, then there might be different story of Oulu, and there might be something else that you maybe story that you don't want to tell. So you have to be prepared if you want to work with artists. That's they might tell you something. They might tell something that you don't want to hear.
Also to add that what is very important, I think anyway, when it is an artistic process, etc., is to dare to fail and how to learn from that as well. And I think we're, in terms of Oulu 2026, it's important that there are these massive risks that are being taken. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of, too safe, and I don't think we are going to get there. But taking big risks, small risks, big risks in different ways, and sometimes we do fail, and we can't always plan that it will be, we will reach, all of those goals that we have set out to do. But those risks are very important, and I feel that, particularly in the artistic world, it's really important to take risks and fail and learn from that and see where it's going to take. I gave the example of the Please Switch On when we did that year-long research to do that. And the first test we did, we failed completely and miserably. Absolutely everything went wrong. But from that, you kind of start looking at, okay, what do we need to do in order to make this work?
If I can just add to that, I agree there's a sense towards risk, but I would also argue that there's ways to develop infrastructure that can be very sound and that can bring results and outcomes. You may not know exactly what the things are that you're going to be creating, and you can't particularly predict that. But to be able to create a process that allows for that kind of creation and risk-taking in a process that moves things forward. And I'll just, Arthur, if I don't mind bringing up our conversation, Arthur at the back of the room who works for the city, speaking about working with teachers and the idea of potentially creating a process that allows for education to happen, but maybe not necessarily having as strong of a sense about what those potential products are going to be at the initial stages, but being confident you're going to get there, but you don't, there's still some sense about not knowing exactly yet, but you can be confident in the process. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I guess he does. So.
Thank you, Blair, for bringing this up. We actually had this kind of hackathon day with 12 teachers yesterday at the university. We got this program running, and it's going really well. But now being here and listening to you and being really inspired, I was thinking that we do need these kind of narratives to schools also to encourage them to think a little bit more openly and get excited about the future. And I was thinking that it'd be great, well, I'm spreading the word of STEAM education, to actually add more things to that, to actually bring these examples of VR and what's happening in EduLab and what's happening in arts and dance. So if you're happy, I would like to gather some resources for the schools for them to look at and get even more inspired, because even though STEAM is great, I feel like there's so much more we can cover if we do it together. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know how much people are familiar with this term STEAM, but so STEM, maybe you've heard of this term STEM, which is a term that's been thrown around in education. So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so it's this real drive within education to try to get very young people interested in, for example, engineering as a career. But then there's this term STEAM, where they put the A in STEM to include the arts. And so it's this idea of how do the arts connect with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to be this term STEAM.
In the field that I have been presenting, biological arts or arts and technology was present, and we have an example from ArTech program where the 8th and 9th grade, 7th and 8th graders are visiting the museums, and in the Museum of Arts in Luffi, I was designing a workshop that was based on biological arts and then microscopy building. Basically, they can use their own phones to actually build up microscopes and use own mobile phones and then see the realm of beyond their sensorium with this microscope and be part of biological arts. So you can actually use artistical project that is open to bring in technological part, biological part, different elements. So it's possible, and it encourages the youngsters. Of course, the feedback of the 9th graders was varying, like always, but it was still feedback. But they got the microscopes to their classes and to themselves, so it was quite successful in that sense. So it's possible and doable, and it has to be thought out, and it can actually expand this whole idea of STEAM in concrete way.
One idea that comes to my mind, but I don't actually know what they kind of evaluate in those kind of applications. But I suppose the main idea is to demonstrate how anything that Oulu has done or is doing is affecting the lives of the citizens and the culture. So basically, you can, in isolation, talk about Nokia, glory days and for the force of Nokia, etc. But that affects only on the engineering, the workforce, and then the reviewers might look at so what's the point regarding the citizens? What affected the culture of the citizens here in Oulu? And same with the technology. So the companies might create products for businesses. That affects only on businesses, and even arts can create art only for small circles. That doesn't have cultural impact. So I would assume that the target has to be set high up on trying to find the high cultural impact for the citizens of that should be the driver.
Just one sort of comment or question I'd like to make. I'm sort of maybe one round behind here. I wanted to speak on the problem of risks and resources and things that have been talked about. In my short time that I've lived here, I've learned about the funding models in, say, Academy of Finland, Business Finland, things like this. I'm getting sort of an idea of how the government's thinking at a higher level. It's sort of secondhand, but I'm learning this as I go. And I get the sense that because of the economic downturn, maybe it's Nokia related, also the recession of about a decade ago, Finland's recovered very nicely over the last few years, but I get the sense that things are in a sort of either austerity or post-austerity kind of mindset, and a lot of the arguments always have to be, I want to do this research and it has to connect to economic growth or else it'll be killed. And it just looks like that to me a lot coming in from the outside, and I understand the reasons for that. There's a question I have for government here, I guess, which is it safe now to maybe start investing more in the pure subjects, arts, science, mathematics, other kinds of things where it's a good time to invest, I feel like, more in the longer term kind of growth and development, take these kind of risks and do these other kinds of things, and not necessarily have to connect everything to economic growth directly, because I think that will severely stifle creativity and growth in the longer term. And I'm concerned about that just coming in, so I'm kind of wondering, I don't know, maybe people here can tell me what the government's thinking at the highest levels, but that's something that concerns me a bit, that I don't think everything should be connected to an argument for economic growth.
Any comments? More questions?
Credit to Antti. I just checked his video on YouTube. Antti I think every artist need an audience, and it is easy to go to YouTube. And my name is Pekka Ronkainen.
Thank you.
Well, I must say that there was a reindeer in your video, and that's typical. It's Nordic nature. So why does not that is seen in the culture more?
Well, I will be quite fast with this. It comes to the realm what I'm doing. So I see nature and us so integral part of the nature to our physical spectrum and our biome. That all of this surrounding nature is quite naturally part of the culture. Reindeers and certain animals are cultural beings in that sense that they are so bound to our food and belief systems and our even Christmas traditions nowadays. So they are strongly part of the cultural aspect also.
Ask you a question that visited in Linz one of the prominent arts and technology festivals called Ars Electronica. They said that they actually started as a festival where they wanted to bring the art to everyone. And they started it as a festival where they wanted to use technology, how actually the performance, which could not be reached by everyone because it's limited space, how could they actually augment it? And what they did, they actually broadcasted it in the first stages. They started with the radio, and they actually made the radio broadcast go for further than 40 kilometers from the space where it was first performed. And I think that was kind of, creative problem solving. How could we actually use what we have existing technology and what we have in arts, reach more people? And in a way, I kind of would like to see next year, or years to follow, that we would have, for example, the examples that Steve was showing us about the graffiti that is actually visible only through the augmented, tools, that we could actually have an augmented stage where, because we have 40,000 people currently coming to the Lumov Art Festival, how could we actually bring in the scientists and their technology and show that this is what we can do now, and then have artists who make these graffiti and make these arts appear through these tools. I think this is creative problem solving. And then again, something else, we could use Valossa AI to show what we have done here, kind of index it, and we could have a Google of Oulu art. We could have all the street art, we could have all the performances which have been filmed, we could have everything that's been streamed in Oulu AI, which we could then distribute to the world. I think these are the things that we could kind of challenge us. How can we do and use these existing things that we create here? Like we do have FlexBrite, which is doing here printed LEDs. How can we use that more in our arts? I think that's the question, and then the storytelling comes from that how do we actually use those as tools? But I would really like to challenge Mika and Steve and everyone here to kind of participate in this. That how can we actually make the existing things even greater?
Any comments?
So the event that Taikabox organizes together with Oulu University of Applied Sciences, Oulu Dance Hack, is a kind of event that we have created to really try to bring the artists and technology specialists together. And there we really hope that particularly local technology businesses will bring their kit to be tested by artists. And this is really an open invitation. We have been doing this for 3 years. And this is really working very well for the artists who are coming. We have international artists from all over the world arriving to Oulu for 3-4 days every year. And we are very keen to get more and more businesses involved and getting their stuff, their products to be tested, because the artists will use them in a completely different way than what you might think.
I think one of the things, interesting developments in the AI is this generative models, which are basically kind of inverse kind of learning models. They create stuff, and this might be even more scary than what I presented previously. But they're actually creating this maybe at this stage a little bit nightmarish kind of scenery and stuff like that. But of course they are part of the things that they have learned. So also, you know, I was thinking about exactly this, that the scientists, the artists can actually use these generative models to maybe, I don't know, train something local, something unique, and then have computers construct something, and that becomes a kind of cyber-physical system of the artist training it, and then using the software to kind of create new stuff. So just throwing it out there, that it's an interesting venue.
Any more questions, comments, challenges? Yeah, I think before we wrap up this session, like coming from the games industry, I'll always see kind of a balance between art and tech, because it's about video games. There's the word video, and there's always the audiovisual component in any of the games. But having a background in engineering, so being no artist whatsoever, it still kind of puzzles me living in Oulu. And although I know there are many brilliant artists in this city, and there are brilliant content creators, but still somehow I feel that Oulu is all about high technology. It's always tech, tech, tech. And the kind of the art and content side seems to stay somewhere in their boundaries or somewhere in their periphery. And I'm not necessarily talking about the amount of resources that are available, but in a kind of cultural sense. So do you agree, or am I just missing something?
Maybe there's a natural reason, because there's maybe 3 or 4 long grants per year in the area, and then it's about resourcing in that sense. So how much you want artists to emerge, they need resources to actually do the work. Of course, there's now tendency in governmental bodies that they want to increase the art funding really massively. So we'll see what happens during the next election round and what kind of governmental plans are done, but there's a heavy lobbying going on that side. But it's not only governmental thing, it's also thing of all the town, that maybe the whole cultural capital year plan can be that increases the resourcing on arts in more wider way, so it has to be acknowledged seriously and realistically, because of course we can do hobby and be hobbyist artists, but then it's not you cannot get good results out of that. And now when you get funding or commissions, it happens quite often that it's outside of Oulu, so most of our artists are working outside also, so that's a realistic view of the things.
And I think one problem is about bubbles. There is big art scene in Oulu, but it's not maybe connecting to the bubble of tech scene, and it's about media coverage, maybe game industry is more media, like interested in media than traditional art scene. So it's just about bursting these bubbles and making maybe get them to work together, and it's also about resources.
Yeah, I do agree with Levi about these bubbles and just bursting them. And kind of, this might be slightly different as well, but I personally, when working, I view technology as a kind of, the best when it works for me as an artist is when I can view technology as another live being, rather than a cold, clinical, what it is presented on a if you Google for technology, you usually get these blue pictures of things, and it be also a bit off-putting potentially for artists. But for me, I feel what I've found working with the technology is to find the more organic nature of it, and that's what I like. And maybe there's these kind of, I don't know whether it's to do with values or way perceptions and things like that, but finding ways of bursting the bubbles and creating dialogue between different groups.
I mean, we had bit that there was a round in Finnish Cultural Foundation about game and arts now starting this year. So there's this kind of interest on combining or going outskirts of gaming, core of gaming, like game funding bodies. So there's this interest on developing indie games or artistical approaches or humanistic approaches or more wilder approaches on gaming. And it's not only gaming that it's I think the more broader spectrum is that the funders are also looking this kind of border zones of technologies or areas where there's not yet economical possibilities, but there's some ideas growing outskirts of the fireplace in that sense. We are between the darkness and light now. So there's possibilities. Maybe I would encourage people to apply different bodies and be more wilder with their applications.
There's no green lights.
Can you on the bottom maybe?
Oh, also, we are recruiting regional artists of game arts at the moment for Arts Promotion Center Finland. So game art is becoming part of this traditional arts world, but it takes time. Like I think it's happening, but it's these old forms of structures. They are hard. They are slow to change.
Yeah, if I can just add on this idea of the visibility of engineers as a profession in Oulu, but also potentially how these kind of efforts can also showcase the arts as just as much of a profession that can be something that, for example, the young people within our programs at Oulu Ammattikorkeakoulu were within the Department of Media and Performing Arts. So for them to actually see that there are possibilities for a career in some of these potential interfaces of, for example, games or arts or technology.
Thank you very much. Now I think it's time to start bursting the bubbles, and there's a lunch break in between, but at 1 p.m. Tanya's performance will be available for us all in the Game Lab premises, just across the yard over there. So be on time, so you don't want to miss that. And there will be other expo stuff as well, so people will give out demos and you have time to network and talk. And there will be cocktails and refreshments afterwards, so don't run away. Thank you.